Hello, and welcome back to the Rice Robotics Club Robo-Tutorial. In this video, we'll be moving on to our next subassembly, which will be an assembly between Link 2, the sensor mount, and the ultrasonic sensor here. We'll be mating all of these together to fully define their positions in our final assembly. And to do this, we'll be using some of the mates we've already used, both the group mate and likely the fastened mate, but we'll also be using some new mates, including the slider mate and the planar mate. So we'll return to our Onshape document, create a new assembly from the file select, and now we'll insert all of the parts we need for this assembly. So select Insert from the toolbar. We need to insert Link 2, and the ultrasonic sensor, which consists of both the sensor and this sensor mount that actually connects to Link 2. Click the green check mark to finalize the selection. So first, we need to use the group mate just like we've used before. We're going to group both the sensor and the sensor mount. So if you grab the sensor mount, it is its own body, so it's going to move freely of the sensor, which we don't want because we designed that part initially in the exact position that we wanted it to be in the assembly. Also, if you drag like individual parts of the sensor even, they are also their own bodies. So we need to apply a group mate so that these parts can't move with respect to one another. So we hit group in the toolbar, select all of these bodies, group them together, and now if you click and drag this part, they'll all move together, which is exactly what we want. Now we'll create another fastened mate just like we've done before. We'll be fastening Link 2 to the origin. So select the fastened mate tool. We need to have the first mate connector be at the center of this circular face, which you can see doing properly here. And we want to mate that to a mate connector at the origin. So place the second mate connector at that position. And we actually want to flip this orientation so that our sensor will be mounted at the top of this assembly. Hit the green check mark to finalize the fastened mate. And we actually don't want another fastened mate, so we're going to X out of this dialog and move on to our next step. Okay, so now we're going to add what's called a slider mate. So a slider mate between any two bodies removes 5 degrees of freedom, but leaves 1 degree of freedom, which is translation, along their primary axis. So I'll show you what that means. It's all based on the orientation of our mate connectors. So making sure that we're aware of how the mate connectors impact the behavior of our mates is going to be key in getting this part to work. So in the toolbar, select slider mate, and then first select the top face of this of Link 2 and click. And then select the bottom face of the sensor mount that will sit on the top face of this Link 2. You can see how this works in the full assembly where the mount sits on top of the Link 2 just like this. So select the corresponding bottom face, make sure that it's at the center. It doesn't really matter where it is in the horizontal direction, but it needs to be horizontally centered, sorry. So set the second mate connector to be on the bottom face of this sensor, where it's at the center of this face. And you'll see they are phasing into one another, so we do need to flip their orientation. Now hit the green check mark. So in this case, we got lucky. The mate connector that we created just so happened to automatically be in the correct orientation, so that it looks correct to start. So now we have a slider, right? So we have these two faces, and they have 1 translational degree of freedom between them. But this is not the translational degree of freedom we wanted. So I wanted them to slide along the direction of this edge. So it would slide back and forth in this direction, in the Y direction. But in this case, it's sliding up and down in the Z direction. So we don't need to delete the mate. What we need to do is edit the mate connectors so that it slides in the correct direction. So remember what I said, a slider mate allows 2 bodies to slide with respect to one another along their primary axis. So the primary axis is just the z-axis of a mate connector. And we need to make sure that that primary axis is pointing in the direction that we want the 2 bodies to slide, which is parallel to this edge. So to achieve this, we need to go and edit our slider mate. So in the feature tree, remember you have all of the parts that we've added. Most of these are individual parts of the ultrasonic sensor, and then we have our link 2 up here. So for this, we need to go down. We have our parts here. We also have our mates listed here. We need to edit this slider mate. So hit the drop down. You'll see we have two mate connectors that make up this slider mate. One of them is fixed to link 2, and the other is fixed to the sensor mount. Start by editing this first mate connector. For me, this is the one that's fixed to link 2. Now I need to realign the mate connector. You'll see that the primary axis, the blue z-axis, is pointing up, but we actually want it to be pointing in this direction so that this is the direction that the two bodies will slide with respect to one another. So hit realign, and then select primary axis entity, and then select the entity that you want the primary axis of this mate connector to be parallel to. So whenever you select this primary axis entity, it needs to be part of the same, it needs to be fixed to the same part that the mate connector is. So this is fixed on link 2. So we need to select some line or reference on link 2 that correctly reorients the mate connector. In this case, it's just going to be this edge here. That indicates the direction that we want the two bodies to slide. So select that. You'll see it rotates. So now the primary axis is pointing in the correct direction. And that is correct for now, but it did mess up the orientation of our sensor. So we'll also need to edit that mate connector. Hit the green check mark to save these changes. And then edit the second mate connector, which for me is fixed to the sensor mount. Now its primary axis is pointed normal to this surface, perpendicular to this surface, but we actually want it to be pointing along this direction towards the front of the sensor mount. So we're going to realign the mate connector. We're going to select this edge, and that's going to flip the primary axis to be pointing in the correct direction. And now you can see its primary axis is pointing in roughly the right direction, but it needs to be flipped so that it will be pointing towards the front of the pulley tube of the. But it needs to be flipped so that it will be pointing at the front of link 2 rather than the back. So to do this, you'll just select flip primary axis. And now this looks like we'd expect, and it should slide in the correct direction. Hit the green check mark to save our changes. Now slide, and you'll see that this is exactly what we want. We want it to slide in this plane. And since it's sliding in this plane, it's now centered. If we look at it from this angle, it's now centered horizontally, which is what we want. Now we just need to make sure that it's not actually allowed to slide here. Make sure that it is positioned so that these holes are correctly aligned with link 2. To do this, we're going to use a planar mate. A planar mate acts between two faces of separate bodies and ensures that those faces are always coplanar. So this is a bit simpler to understand than the slider mate. Go up to the toolbar and select the planar mate. Select this front face of link 2 and select one of these back support points of the sensor mount. It'll snap into place. You'll see that it's not totally correct. You have to hit solve so that it evaluates all of the mates at once. But now that looks like it's properly positioned, and if we rotate, we'll see that these holes are correctly aligned. This is because I had the dimensions ahead of time. I knew that these holes would be aligned. But if you got to this stage and the holes didn't line up, you could then go back to the part studio of either the sensor mount or link 2 and make the necessary changes so that everything aligns correctly. But in this case, everything is correct. So we want to finalize this planar mate. We'll exit the mate dialog. And now this assembly is fully defined. If you grab any part of it and try and slide it around, it won't, because we've removed all degrees of freedom from the system, which is what we want for this subassembly. Make sure to rename the assembly appropriately, sort it into the subassembly folder, and now we're ready to move on to the next step.